morning. It's good to see you. It's good to be up here. My first, I think this is true for everybody, my first time being exposed to poverty is ingrained in my mind. And I know, watching some of the team that went to Honduras, it was, for some of them, their first time seeing real poverty. And when you see it, it sticks in your mind. So I want to put a picture up here. This is not the picture, but this is a picture from a place in Dubai called Karama. My dad moved out to Dubai when I was 12 years old. I spent most of my childhood into my early 20s going back and forth to Dubai between 1 and 3 times a year. And when you look on TV or see pictures of Dubai, you see the big glamorous buildings, the sky rises, the 7-star hotels, the islands that they built out of nothing and put giant villas on. What you don't see is what lies in the background of Dubai, and it is the immigrant workers that make Dubai happen. And so when I first moved there, my dad lived in an area called Karama, and there was a little marketplace in Karama. And it was one of those places where you go, no, I didn't put this picture in there. One of those places where you go where it's kind of like a half indoor, half outdoor strip mall, and everything's really narrow, and there's hundreds of people, and there's a gazillion stores, and you walk through the bustle of people, and all the tellers are there at their doors, like trying to entice you in to buy T-shirts and jewelry and copy DVDs. That was the one when I was younger. They'd copy DVD, copy watches, copy DVD. I was like, no. We're not going to do that. Maybe I did, but I was a sinner back then. But we would go to this place. Why would we go to Karama? We'd go because they had a bunch of knockoff goods. And it's like fake Armani, fake Gucci, fake Nike. And so you'd go there, and for almost no money, you could get all the fake stuff you wanted, and nobody at home knew, and you looked like you were loaded. And, we're pretentious. So we would go to this market all the time. What happened, though, I was 16. I was there with a friend. We went into a store. There was this guy in the store, trying to convince us to buy clothing. And so we'd put it on, and, you're so handsome. And so we would joke, oh no, you're so handsome. No, you're so handsome. And then every time me and my buddy Stuart would go to the marketplace, we'd walk down this place and we'd start shouting, handsome! And he'd come running out the store knowing it was us. And we built this relationship with these people in this store because of it. One of those guys, I didn't know at the time was going to happen, but became one of my best friends. And is still one of my best friends to this day. He's not there anymore. He's back in Bangladesh. But I remember I would come home and then I'd head back to Dubai. And there was a change in me because previously I wanted to go see all the wealth and the riches of the country, but this time I would get there and my dad had moved further away from this market, and I'd be like, when can I go to Karama? I want to go see my friend. And you don't want to go there. So I'd go and meet with this guy, and eventually one day he said, can we grab some food together? So I don't know if you know the Middle East very well. The guys like to hold hands. So he was very pleased to take my hand and parade me down the marketplace, being his friend. We went to this place to eat food. I won't tell you all the stories of what went on there. The next time we get together, he wants me to come to his house for food. And this is where I got my first exposure to poverty, because this picture is a picture of the complex where he lived and the kind of situation that he lived in. So I remember he wanted to take me home to have food with him. And so we go to his apartment, and I walk in the door, and it is this. There are 8 to 10 guys living in one tiny little room. This is wide angle. And all immigrants, they all have nothing. I remember the floor being covered in dirt. I remember needing the restroom, and so they take me through, it's an apartment complex. There's maybe 5 or 6 apartments downstairs with 8 to 10 guys living in each of these apartments in little cots like this, and one bathroom shared between them that nobody has ever cleaned. And then he's going to cook me dinner. So this is the bedroom, this is the living room, this is also the dining room. So he goes through to the kitchen. I follow him through, and I look, and I just see grease everywhere. I see pots and pans. I see dirt on the floor. I see cockroaches running everywhere. I see him pick up some plates and brush the cockroaches off to bring it through to be able to be used. And then we're there and we're sitting there and all of his friends are around us and we're sitting on the floor and he serves me this food that they made that they spent a lot of money to make, and we sit there on the floor together. Did I tell you he doesn't speak English? He speaks minimal English, so we're sitting there not really able to have conversation and eating. I just remember sitting there like cringing anytime I saw something out the corner of my eye. I'd be like, trying not to that cockroach is coming toward my feet. And I just remember like sitting there really uncomfortable, but wanting to love this guy who was a friend of mine. Later on that day, we're outside, it's night, the stars are out, we're sitting outside together and we're talking, and I just started asking him some questions about his life in Dubai. We're at a point in time where I have a job that requires me to have a different cell phone to my own phone. So what I remember very distinctly is I had my iPhone in this pocket and I had the BlackBerry that my work gave me in this pocket. And we're talking and he's telling me how hard it is. He's like, he shows these pictures of the wealth and opulence of Dubai, and then we come out here to make our fortune. We arrive in the country, they take our passports off us so we can't leave. And then someone had contacted him, here's a job in this shop selling clothes. He's like, but my boss is my landlord, and I get paid the same every year, but my rent increases every year. And we're talking at one point, and I was like, I don't want to be rude, I don't know if this is appropriate, but like, what do you make? Like, what's your salary? And $100 a month. So he's making a salary of $100 a month, then paying his rent out of that $100 a month, with his landlord increasing his rent every year, but not increasing his salary. And I remember as he said it, I felt like someone had put two giant weights in my pockets. Because I was like, I've got my phone that is my phone. And at that point, as an iPhone, it was like $300 or $400. Then a $300 or $400 BlackBerry that I just had to have on me in case work tried to call me. And I was like, I have in my pockets almost the equivalent of his entire year's salary. And one of those is just in case. And I remember as he's talking and sharing in his broken English about his life, it felt like that, the BlackBerry in particular, it felt like it was getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And I just wanted to take it out of my pocket and like, here, take it, take my phones. Not that that would have been any good. That marked me because up until that point, I'd grown up in Scotland with a single mom with 3 kids. She was living paycheck to paycheck. I found out later in life, I did a lot of extracurricular stuff. I found out later in life, my mom was not eating for days to be able to save the money to let me go on the trips that I wanted to go on. So I grew up with nothing in a really nasty area of town that we were embarrassed to live in. And so I thought I was poor. And then here I am in this place realizing what true poverty looks like and realizing the amount of wealth that I had on my possession. And it marked me. We live in a world where there is a huge divide between the wealthy and the poor. There are loads of pictures I could have stuck up here. I'm just going to put one up. This is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I like these pictures that are juxtaposing two things together. There are lots of places like this where poverty and riches are side by side in the world. If you Google wealth and poverty divide, you'll find hundreds of pictures. But just look on the left of the picture at where the normal people of the country live. And then right next door with their swimming pools on every floor, their basketball courts, their tennis courts, the people that live there in opulence while the people next door are eking out an existence, barely surviving in the world that they live in. I want to give you some stats about income across the globe. And this is not to make us feel bad, it's just to remind us where we sit in the world. The average global personal income annually is $9,733. So the average annual salary of someone in the world, $9,733. The average global household income, so all the people living under one roof, is just over $12,000 a year. the median per capita household income. So what does that mean? So median is the most common number, and per capita means let's take all of the income in the US and divide it by the population of the US. So if every person was earning, what's the percentage? So the per capita income of the world is just under $3,000 a year. If you have a salary of $100,000 or a household income of $100,000, you're in the top 10% of wealth in the world. 3 billion people in the world live on less than $2 a day. Now, this one, you read these stats and you're like, okay, remember the population of the United States is estimated right now at 332 million people. 3 billion people is 9 United States of America. So there are 9 United States of America worth of people living in the world on less than $2 a day. You look at these figures up here, the average Social Security annual payment. So if you retired at 65 and you get the average amount you will make for the year, and we know this isn't a lot of money, $43,000 is what you'll get for the year. So in our retirement, with our Social Security, we get 4 to 5 times the average salary of someone working in another part of the world. It's crazy. We look at our monthly salary and we go, I don't have enough money. But people around the world are living annually what we're making in 1 month. We're coming to the end of 1 Timothy, and I wanted to put this up to give us context for this command and some of the things that you've heard over the last couple of weeks. But let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 6 and look at Paul's commands to the wealthy. But I want us to be reminded as he's given these instructions to the wealthy in the community that that actually includes every one of us that sits in this room. So 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting in verse 17, Paul says to Timothy, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." There are 2 main themes through the book of 1 Timothy that we've seen so far, right? 2 overarching pieces of this book. One is the instructions that Paul gives to Timothy to guard sound doctrine. And that is the first half of the book, and then it's scattered through this last part. The other part, that's the overwhelming part of the book, is Paul's instructions to Timothy about how people within the church are supposed to deal with wealth. So we looked at how you're supposed to care for widows, how you're supposed to honor the elders of the church financially, and then over the last couple of weeks, some clear instructions about our relationship to wealth, our need for contentment. So these 2 major themes, sound doctrine, and then the relationship of the believer to wealth. That's going to come back in a second. A little earlier in chapter 6, Paul gives this command to Timothy. He says, "Timothy, fight the good fight." The words say, "But you, man of God, flee from all of this. Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses." Fight the good fight. At this section, verses 17 to 19, there are 2 fights that Paul is instructing, particularly the wealthy, that they need to put energy into fighting. And we're going to call those where we put our hope, and then how we define wealth. So these 2 fights, where we put our hope and how we define wealth. Before we go there, I want to just take a second with the meta fight of the book. And so the meta fight, we'll call it fight number 0, is the fight for doctrine. So Paul, through this book, is encouraging Timothy and the church to be on some battlefields. The first one, fight for sound doctrine. So the fight is, are you walking in sound doctrine, or are you buying in to false doctrine? According to Paul writing to Timothy, false doctrine leads to the wrong kind of living. And through this book, he's given us lots of examples of this. In the passage, if you're living with right doctrine, the commands should lead to love. We know this. But there are all sorts of other outcomes. And through the latter part of the book, he wants us to understand that a wrong doctrine often leads to a wrong relationship to our finances. It leads to a wrong relationship. Say that one fast 10 times. Wrong relationship, wrong relationship, wrong. It leads to having a bad attitude to money. So it's important in our life. We've got to think about, right? We think about what does it mean to have sound doctrine and false doctrine. We tend to, in the evangelical world, go, well, that means like we put it down in the middle, right? Sound doctrine would be Jesus died for the sins of the world. False doctrine would be there's other ways to get to heaven. And so we're going to say fight for sound doctrine, and that's true. But there are all sorts of subtle ways that we end up buying into false doctrine. And Paul starts at the beginning of the book. Watch out for all these endless genealogies, the old wives' tales, the controversies that are in the world. There are simple philosophies that we buy into about where wealth comes from, what happiness entails, about there's the false doctrines of the prosperity gospel. God's going to give us everything we want. If we just follow him, he's going to give us abundance and we'll never lack anything. God wants everyone healed all the time, and there's supposed to be no suffering in the world. If you're ill, it's a lack of faith. There are these false doctrines that we buy into all the time. But the subtle ones are the little philosophies that we buy into. I check the horoscope just to see what that might mean for the day. I'm going to trust in a psychological tool to help me figure out how I'm supposed to live my life. It's all about love. It doesn't matter what anyone does or what it looks like. Just love everybody. It's the doctrine of tolerance that you can't disagree with anyone. You have to let everyone believe whatever they want to believe, and you don't have a right to stand for truth. There are all these false doctrines we buy into, and all of them lead to wrong living. And so Paul is instructing Timothy, guard the core of the doctrine, because if it is right, the right belief the right actions are going to follow. But if we get these wrong, then our attitude and our behaviors are not going to be the way they're supposed to be. So that's the meta fight. So at this point in the letter, Paul is honing in on the relationship we have to riches or wealth or money. And so he's going to instruct Timothy to instruct the church on two fights that we have to fight if we want to live in the way of Jesus. So the first fight at this part of the letter is this: where do we put our hope? Paul tells Timothy, command those who are rich to fight this fight and put their hope in the right place. So command those who are rich in the present world, command them not to be arrogant and not to put their hope in wealth, which is uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. There's a few things in this passage that we've got to stop and think about. One is riches so easily lead the way to arrogance. The word that they're using here for arrogance is a word that really is to be focused on yourself and considering yourself better than other people. But it's my needs and my desires are more important than everyone else's. I can't be the only one in the room who has had experiences of wrestling with, do I help this person in need or do I buy the new coffee maker? Do I help the person in need or do I keep that money to the side because we're saving up for a car? Do I help the person in need, but that's the money that we've put aside for our vacation next year and we're going to go to Hawaii and we really need it? They'll find another place to get milk for their baby. Right? Riches lead to arrogance. My needs and my desires are more important than the desires out there. It leads to arrogance because we tend to live in a part of the world where I've earned it. Look at my savings account. I earned that money. What is that homeless person doing to earn their keep? An arrogance that says, I earned it, I deserve it, I worked hard for this, this is my money to spend my way, the way I want to. Why should I give it to someone out there that might misuse it, that didn't work for it, that didn't earn it? They don't deserve it, I deserve it. That's arrogance at the core. It's what Jesus is often challenging the people about as he points to the difference between the Pharisees and the other people in the world that think they're better than everybody else. Doesn't just make us arrogant, but we slip into this subtle place where we put our hope in our wealth. You know your hope is in your wealth when you feel like your future security is based on the amount of money that you have in your retirement account or your savings account. You know your hope is in wealth when you're saying, if I could just own my house, then I know I will be secure for later rather than renting right now. You know your hope is in wealth where you find yourself going, if I could just get that car or buy that boat or fix this part of my house to look this way or wear those kind of clothes or go on that kind of vacation or eat that kind of food, then I'll be fine, then I'll be happy, then life will be better. You know your hope is in wealth when it's like, life is hard, but if I get that job, I'll be able to make a heck of a lot more money than I'm making right now, a lot quicker than I'm making it right now, a lot easier than I'm making it right now, and then you realize that's not actually true because money never comes easy. You know your hope is in wealth when it's life will be better if I have the car, the house, the boat, the job, the spouse of my dreams. We so easily take our hope off of God and put it back onto things. You know it's there when things are financially tight in a way that you weren't expecting, and your first thought processes are a loan from a bank, or borrow money from a friend, or hopefully some generous person is just going to hand me $2,000, rather than, God, I need your help. How many of us, when we're in need, turn to a person before we turn to God, thinking that they have the resources to help our need and forgetting that He ultimately is the one who has it. When our hope is in wealth, we start to look at the people around us with dollar signs on their heads rather than brothers and sisters in the faith. I need to be in relationship with that person because they give me this thing. I need to keep that person happy because they provide me with this. In those moments, our hope is in our wealth rather than in God. Most of us would like an extra $2,000. Anyone in here, if I was going to give out $2,000, would turn it down? Right? Most of us want the extra money. Most of us want a healthy savings account. Most of us want more money in our 401k. Most of us want friends and family that we can turn to when we're in need. But so often, we have put all of our hope and all of our identity and all of our dreams in a pot of money rather than the one person who can provide what we need. Paul tells Timothy, don't put your hope in wealth because it's uncertain. In Proverbs 23, the writer of Proverbs says, don't wear yourself out to get rich. Don't trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches and they're gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. I've seen that with my wallet often. The money in there seems to sprout wings and fly off, and it's worse when you have kids, right? The uncertainty of wealth is one of the, common sense, no-brainer reasons why we don't want to put our hope there. We've seen its uncertainty, right? Anyone in the room lived through a pandemic recently? We saw it through COVID. We saw how precarious our jobs and our income were. We saw the impact when our businesses didn't have the customers coming in that we were expecting. We saw it when all of a sudden we had to stay home. We saw it. Well, some people saw abundance during COVID, right? Because you got unemployment and it was fantastic and it was more than you normally get normally. But we saw it. We saw how precarious it is. We see how easily in our lives, and we do this in lots of areas, right? We focus on the gifts rather than the giver. We fix our eyes on the money that we have rather than on the person that gives it. We don't pray very often for the things that you need tomorrow because you can look at your bank account and see that you have the money to buy it. The only time we tend to turn our attention to him is when there's not enough there and we're going, God, how the heck am I going to get to the end of the month? Or, oh, I really, really want that house. It's way outside of my budget. God, we need a good deal. Would you help the realtor to cut his commission? Would you help the people take a lower offer? Would you just stretch your budget to make it work? Those are the moments where we turn our attention to him. But in reality, our eyes are focused on the gift rather than the giver. We so easily get focused. This passage says, I love this part of it. Put your hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. God gives us what we need not just so that we can survive, but gives us it for our enjoyment. But so easily we focus on our own pleasure rather than the one who gives us blessing to be enjoyed. And we know how that looks in the world, right? We spend money for things that we shouldn't. We disobey God. We pursue the lusts of the flesh and of the heart and of the eyes instead of him. Focused on meeting our pleasures at the expense of other people. I mean, the multi-billion-dollar pornography industry that is about abusing and objectifying people for someone else's pleasure. There's so many places where that happens. I think it's important when we talk about riches and the pursuit of riches. I often use the examples that are liberal spending, right? We're going for the house, we're going to buy the car, we're going to buy the boat. But we need to be reminded too that being a miser and a skinflint is as much of an attachment to money as is someone that goes out there and blows it on ridiculous things. I can't spend anything now because I got to make sure I've got a big bank account. Is as much as of a money problem as the people that go out and spend it. It's so easy to focus on wealth rather than on God. So, Paul knows this. He's explaining it to Timothy. I mean, we've heard this before. This is not new. You've heard it in churches before. You heard it from Jim a couple of weeks ago. You heard it from Ashley the week before. You've read it in the Bible a million times. This is not new. But what I want to say today, we have to fight the good fight. The fleshly tendency is always to turn our eyes off of God back onto wealth. We have to fight to take our eyes off of our riches and put them back on him. And it's a fight that will live to our dying day. We live in a part of the world that is telling us we need more stuff. We're living in a part of the world that is selling us an image of what success and value looks like. And so quickly we put our eyes back on the things of the world rather than on him. So are you willing to fight to put your hope off of the things of the world and back where it's supposed to be? That was fight number one. Fight number two, the second fight that we have to fight, is the fight to reorient our definition of wealth. We all have a definition of wealth. We, as believers, we tend to know that the world's definition of wealth is wrong and that we need a different definition, but we don't fight for it. The fight is between viewing riches as things that we have here on earth, and that being more important, over the riches that are promised to come later. So Paul said to Timothy, command the ones who are rich. It's down here. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Command those who are rich not to put their hope in wealth, but to put their hope on him, because he's going to bless us for our enjoyment. But instead of focusing on those riches, command them to be rich in good deeds. Not rich in bank account, rich in good deeds. To be generous and to be willing to share and to lay up the right kind of treasure that lays the right foundation for the life that's to come, not the one that we're just here. So riches on earth versus riches in heaven. What is your definition of riches? If you're honest with yourself, do you consider rich the people who have abundant materials, or do you consider rich the people who have depth of relationship, who have intimacy with Jesus even when they have materially nothing? I think the reality is Though we would say as believers, we think the eternal riches are more important, we operate on a day-to-day basis with a greater value and a definition that focuses on earthly wealth. The American dream that we buy into pushes us toward the pursuit of wealth. It's about bettering ourselves. Notice it's not about bettering everyone else around about us, but it's a pursuit of wealth and of riches. We know how easily the world throws this at us, right? You know how easily we are swayed towards the riches on earth when we get caught up on things like celebrity gossip, watching the Kardashians, if you know who they are. You know you're caught up in earthly wealth when you spend most of your time on Pinterest boards or watching home improvement shows, or the shows where they fly over to Europe and they buy cottages and castles. You know, we're allowed to enjoy those things. We're allowed to look at something and admire beauty, but so easily we allow those sources of entertainment to be a fuel for our covetousness. So we watch the show and it stirs in us a discontent with what we have here. We watch the show about someone buying and renovating a castle in Europe. What does it do? It makes us want to save money to go see the castles in Europe rather than help the family down the street that are struggling to eat this week. When our money is on the things of the world, our priorities get flipped upside down, and rather than doing the things that God cares about, we start being arrogant and thinking about ourselves. Anyone in here in the process of buying a castle in Europe? Just making sure I wasn't really offending someone. How many people in the room have a collection? Anyone recognize that room? If you've not been in my office yet, I take great pride in my books. When I moved from Scotland to here, I got rid of at least 2 bookshelves worth of books. And this is the funny thing about buying books, right? You spend the money on the book, you read it once usually. If it's a scholarly library, like mine happens to be, I might use a book more than once. That's the justification, right? We lend them out, but then we're really annoyed at people if they mark them or dog-ear the pages or don't take care of them, right? Sometimes we'll lend them out without the dust cover because we don't want that getting damaged. Okay, I get to just be silly. You do realize the dust cover's there to protect the cloth book. And we tend to take it off and damage the cloth book so that we can keep the paper that goes around the outside fine. I'm like, why do we do this? We all have our collections. The silly thing about books is I buy these books in Scotland, and then I pay lots of money to ship them from Scotland to the US so I can still have them. So I've probably paid twice the amount for all of the books. And some of the books I had here, and I shipped them to Scotland the first time. So these books have done more word traveling than some of the people in the world will ever get to do. But you know, like when it comes to our treasure on earth or our treasure in heaven, you know what your treasure is when you start using the word collection. Your book collection, your clothes collection, your copious number of shoes, the coins that you have, the stamps that you like, your teacup sets, the fabrics that you love, the fishing stuff, the bikes, the tools. We all have our collections. We all have things that we spend a ridiculous amount of money on. And at the end of the day, I can't take these books where I'm going. I'm not entirely sure my kids are going to be happy the day I die and they get to inherit my book collection. As much as I want them to be excited by tomes of theology that at that point will be so old they're outdated and no longer relevant. Some of them will be. So easy to subtly put our hope in the earthly riches rather than the eternal riches, which is where our hope is supposed to be. What would happen If you took the money that you've set aside to buy the holiday to Hawaii and you gave it to someone who was struggling to get to work because they needed a car, and they're working 3 jobs while their kids stay at home unsupervised. What would happen if instead of the money that you're saving up to buy a new boat when the one that you've got works just fine, you use that money to help kids have the supplies they needed for school? What happens if instead of buying the next 10 books that are on your list, you looked at someone that's struggling to have groceries and you decided to buy those instead? In those moments, you build relationship. In those moments, you communicate value to people that are struggling. In those moments, people understand that God sees them in their moment of need. So rather than building up what I want and what I need and buying into the materialism that the world has convinced me I need to have, I build up a treasure of a series of stories in my life of people who look at me and see the person who stepped in a moment of need in radical generosity because he believed that God was asking him to give up the things that he'd been saving up for and the pleasures of the world in order to provide them with the basic necessities and the hope of the gospel. I said last week as the Honduras team was sharing that it was a living parable or a living illustration of this, right? We did it. This church gave money, $7,000 to provide a well, and then the $2,100 per person that was donated either by the individual going on the trip or by friends of people going on the trip. We gave generously and took time off work to go to the other end of the world to be rich in good deeds. He doesn't just say be rich in good deeds. He says, be rich in good deeds, be generous and willing to share. A wealth mentality makes us stingy with people because we want to hoard what we have, rather than have the generous, self-sacrificial, giving heart of Jesus. Jesus had a lot to say about wealth. It's one of the topics he speaks about the most. Here's one of his many parables, just to remind us, as you think about your book collection, your fabric collection, your series of houses that you own, the cars that you love, the tools that you have. Jesus said to the people, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions, contrary to what everything in the world around us wants us to believe. And so he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, so he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then I will store all my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. All it takes is one pandemic, one natural disaster, one market collapse, one major health issue, and all of that stuff that we fought for and slaved after and built up is gone, and we feel empty and worthless and wonder what's to come. The world's value system is so upside down from the way of Jesus. We have to fight the good fight, right? It is a physical, emotional, spiritual fight to take your hope off of wealth and keep your hope on the God who gives and distributes wealth as he wills. It takes every piece of mind, heart, soul, and strength to fight, to take our eyes off of defining riches by what the world has to offer, and to understand that the eternal riches are the most important thing that we can have. And we need a whole bunch of spiritual disciplines. We need a whole bunch of practices that shape our life to fight this fight. We need people around us who can remind us of the way we're supposed to be in order that we can do what Jesus wants us to do. And what is that? To take hold of the life that is truly life. Take hold of the life that is truly life. You know this, right? The things that you are saving up for, left side set. Save for retirement, it is wise. The things that we are saving up for that are the pleasures of the world, the materialistic pursuits, those things rob us of life. Because rather than the riches of relationship, rather than walking in the joy of generosity, rather than seeing the eyes light up on someone else where you give them a ridiculous sum of money that they didn't know would ever come their way, you rob yourself of those moments in pursuit of more books on your bookshelf, a bigger yard, more plants in your house, Becca. Fight the good fight. Do not let the world flip the value system upside down and walk in the way of Jesus. Let me pray. God, as we prayed in pre-service prayer, we talked a lot about the passage to abide in you and your word abide in us. And God, that's what we need help with. Every day, 100 times a day, the world bombards us with things that we are supposed to need. Every day we pass by a house that's bigger than ours, a car that's nicer than ours, a bookshelf that's fuller than ours. Every day we pass by something that's prettier or more beautiful or better in our eyes. Someone caught a bigger fish. God, and we allow those things to cause us to put our eyes off of you and onto the things of the world, and then to slave at life to get things that do not last. And so, God, we need your help. Help us to abide in you. Help us to fight against the fallen world system so that we can remember that eternal riches are always better than the riches of the world, so that we can remember to take our hope off of wealth and to put it onto you, the one who provides everything we need and more, and the one who does it for our enjoyment. So God, reorient our desires and strengthen us to fight the fallen system and to walk in the way of Jesus so that the people around us can experience his generosity and his liberality poured through us into their lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.